morning, everyone. My name is Hannah, and I'm a sociologist and a migration expert. Let's have a look at this bird. For those in doubt, it's a canary. And just in case you're thinking you have a migration expert in front of you who's going to tell you about the histories of migration of our species and other species, let me reassure you. I would like to talk to you today about a different feature of the canary. In the 19th century, canaries were used as an early risk predictor in the mines. In the 19th century, the coal mining industry had become a vital industry with the increased use of steam engines. New technologies led to deeper and deeper mines, but at the same time, it resulted in miners being exposed to more dangerous working conditions, more explosions, more dangerous gases. And one of those deadly gases is carbon monoxide. It's a particularly deadly gas. Why? Because it's odorless, it's colorless, and it's highly inflammable. It builds up quickly in the body, and hence it's essential that it's detected early on. So here comes the canary. The canary was soon to be discovered as being particularly sensitive to this deadly gas. Canaries display signs of distress really early on, and much earlier than, for example, when humans would show distress because of carbon monoxide poisoning. And soon they become like an attribute of mines. Rescue teams from 1926 onwards, whenever they would go into the mines in the aftermath of an explosion, they would carry these canaries with them. And their use also expanded to other areas of life. For example, also in war times. In the tragic events of 9/11, in the aftermath, canary breeders in New York couldn't keep up with the demand for requests of canaries because New Yorkers were so worried about the potential of a chemical war attack. Today, I would like to mobilize this metaphor to talk about migration, the way in which we speak about the phenomenon of migration in Europe and how we respond to it. The problems that are associated with migration and that at times are rightly attributed to migration are very real and need to be addressed. Let there be no mistake about that. But they also should be recognized as having a signaling function, as signaling and telling us and warning us at times of larger societal developments, of a set of undercurrents that are shaping our societies and are shaping the conditions that our communities are living in. In the run-up to the elections in Belgium and the Netherlands, migration featured highly and prominently in a lot of the debates. Migration was depicted as responsible for the housing crisis. Migrants were portrayed as stealing jobs of locals. And the phenomenon of migration was seen as tearing, as dissolving the social glue in our communities. But what if those very real concerns about and associated with migration actually signal larger societal developments that, if left unchecked, if left unaddressed, could cause much wider havoc? Let's have a look at housing. A housing crisis is spreading like a blot of ink across Europe. Most European societies today are facing shortages of houses. In Belgium, for example, experts have analyzed and estimated that in the next 10 years we'll need about 500,000 houses in an already densely populated country. This shortage of housing, combined with private investors moving into the housing market, is really driving up prices across Europe and is making it more difficult for families and singles to access housing. For both lower and middle classes, it is becoming more difficult to become homeowners. In Ireland, for example, a country where the housing market suffered of this crisis much earlier than other parts of Europe, this situation and this problem is now shifting from not only the difficulty of purchasing a house, but also of renting one, with young people particularly falling victim to this trend. When we spoke to policymakers in Ireland, they were saying that this situation is really fueling protest against the arrival of newcomers, and that, for example, localities where new reception centers for asylum seekers have fallen victim to arson attacks. But how can we shift the narrative from one where we depict one part of the population as responsible for this problem to one that recognizes that we're all in this together? That this problem of a shortage of affordable housing is one that will affect the generation of our children and of our young people. How can we shift the debate from one where we blame migrants for occupying much-needed housing and driving up prices to one where we have to confront, for example, the figures of the OECD, which really say that in the last decade across Europe, public investment in housing has really been cut. That how do we make sure that we confront the question of what it means for private investors and hedge funds buying up large parts of the housing market and driving up prices? And how do we make sure we confront the very difficult question of what it means to be a homeowner and to have home ownership in the future? Similarly, the discourse of migrants are stealing our jobs is deviating our gaze from larger societal developments that affect both the future of work and our labor force. Across Europe, demographers, macroeconomists, but also business leaders have been warning us about the changing demography of our societies, the kind of aging population, and the impact it's having on the volume and the size of our labor force. Forecasts suggest huge shortages of jobs across Europe. And this will particularly affect Eastern European countries, which are already bearing the costs of emigration. These labor shortages are already felt in sectors such as IT, construction, engineering, and the health sector. So what kind of effects will this have? Firstly, of course, it will affect companies' ability to produce, to deliver services, and to compete at an international scale. But we also will feel the effects of this in our daily lives. It will have consequences for all of us. In the Netherlands, for example, in the last 2 years, there's been periods where trains have been either cancelled or delayed because of shortage of staff. In Belgium, in the Brussels regions, there are pupils that haven't had any Dutch classes since the beginning of the year because of a shortage of teachers. The holiday season is upon us, but the hospitality sector has been sounding the alarm bell for some time now, saying that during the COVID pandemic, many of their staff left and didn't come back. And actually, the COVID-19 pandemic really put the spotlight on this problem. In the UK, for example, there was not sufficient staff to actually tend to the patients coming in. And since then, the UK has set up agreements with African and Asian countries to bring in doctors, nursing personnel, also staff for their elderly care homes. Similarly, during the pandemic, the President of France, President Macron, made a passionate plea to the locals to please come to the fields and pick the strawberries and asparagus that were perishing in the fields because seasonal workers who normally do those jobs, seasonal workers from Eastern European countries but also from beyond, couldn't come to France because of travel restrictions. And actually, very few locals came. The effects on our industries, on our businesses and societies are of such a magnitude that, yes, labor migration will play an important role in this. But what will it look like? What should we consider? Well, firstly, in the short term, yes, labor migration will play an important role in addressing some of the glaring shortages, for example, in the food industry and the health sector. But when it comes to the medium term, when we reflect on what will be needed in the months and years to come, we need to engage in a very different, altogether thought exercise. So let me tease your brain for a few moments. Firstly, we need to lean into the future. We need to forecast the shortages that we'll have, however rudimentary those calculations will be. Secondly, we need to reflect what part of those labor shortages can be addressed or filled by locals. And what do we need for that? How do we make sure that people can reskill, that our training institutes are up to the job? Secondly, how can we also make these jobs more attractive, not only for migrants, but also for locals? Think of better pay, better working conditions, safer conditions, and the like. And then we have a larger societal development that we need to weave into the reflections. A larger societal development that is rocking our so-called coal mines and are catapulting all humans into a state of distress at times. The evolution of automation and AI technology. Let's leave to the side the more kind of emotionally loaded arguments and debates. The reality is that in the short term, we'll be seeing that jobs will be disappearing and new ones will appear. This development puts us all in the same boat. Automation may have cast a dark cloud over the blue-collar jobs, think factory jobs, for example. But it also now, with AI technology, is casting a dark cloud over white-collar jobs. So it's really placing the question of the future of work front and center. What jobs will remain? What new ones will appear? And how quickly will these jobs be reconfigured? And do we have the training and education institutes to support us with this development? As humans facing these living and working conditions, all of us, migrants and locals and others, will have to evolve towards a more flexible mindset. Humans will need to be able to expect disruption, to detect it, to respond to it, and even seize opportunities. And that is so far removed from a discourse which states that migrants are stealing our jobs. And then there's another element that we have to bring into the equation. A lesson that we've learned the hard way in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and also in Germany. What happened then in the 1960s, thousands of migrants were brought over from Turkey, Tunisia, and Morocco to work in the mines and in the factories at the time. You may not imagine it today, but at that time, governments and business leaders just assumed that people would work, they would go home, homes often located close to the factories or close to the mines, and that when the labor need would die down, well, then people would just simply return. But history proved us wrong. People stayed, they brought over wives and husbands, they had children, they needed schools, and soon problems emerged. But it took the Belgian government until the late 1980s or early 1990s to come forward with a fully fledged integration strategy. And since then, of course, the field of integration has moved on quickly. Many local authorities and NGOs experimented with all kinds of different integration practices. Researchers examined those, and now we have a robust menu or toolbox of integration which we can mobilize when new people arrive. Think of language classes, cultural orientation classes, and really making sure that accommodation is not concentrated in one single place. These are important tools to strengthen the social glue of our societies and communities. That glue that makes us feel connected. That glue that gives us a sense of home, of belonging, of feeling safe, protected, secure. A basic human need. Yes, the arrival of newcomers and the swiftly changing face of our communities is sometimes causing concern and tears at that glue. And this is an understandable reaction. If we don't speak the same language, if we notice different habits, if we don't have opportunities to be in contact, then that may cause a reaction of fear, of distrust. And this distrust of the unknown is very understandable. It's written in our human DNA. It's our survival instinct kicking in, the instinct that has allowed us to survive as humans for centuries. Let's acknowledge it. Let's not ignore it. Let's not reproach it. Let's embrace it. And therefore, mobilizing our integration toolbox and being clear as to what we expect from newcomers is so important. But here again, we have to open up our gaze. We have to shift our mindset. We have to disrupt our thinking, as there are other factors that are tearing at our social glue of our communities. In the run-up to the elections, there were analysts pointing out to, for example, the divide between the rural and the urban areas, the countryside often feeling left behind because the capitals decided that maybe they don't need some kind of transport means. There's, of course, also the digital evolution, where, for example, elderly people and others feel excluded from. And then there's, of course, the disappearance of small shops and alike in villages and cities that often are part of that buzzing, beating heart of our communities. Our communities need a different kind of care. Our community lifeline needs a different kind of feeding. This is a warm call to all publics and governments across Europe to really offer that care, to open up our gaze, to look at the societal undercurrents and dedicate ourselves to really getting to the bottom of those, to understanding them and then crafting strong responses to them. Thank you.